The Pediatric Lounge, a podcast taking you behind the door of the physician's lounge to get a deeper insight into just what docs are talking about today. From the clinically profound to the wonderfully routine and everything in between. Good morning, George. It's Tuesday morning, and we're doing a bicostal episode today. You're in Vegas. Dr. Cohen is in sunny San Diego, and I am in clinic seeing patients in Virginia.
Yeah, you have the stethoscope on, and I don't today because I'm at the Office Practicum User Conference here in Las Vegas. Today's topic of discussion is a Canadian drew in San Diego. How did this all happen? And our wonderful guest is Dr. Stewart Cohen.
In this episode, we are honored to welcome Dr. Stewart Cohen, a distinguished pediatrician in San Diego, California. Dr. Cohen has been a general pediatrician with Children's Primary Care Medical Group since 1996 and serves as a senior shareholder and board member of the Independent Physician Association. With over 4 decades of experience, Dr. Cohen has steadfastly advocated for children's health. He's held numerous leadership roles with the American Academy of Pediatrics, including serving as the immediate past district chair of the AAP California and participating on the National AAP Committee on Development and Philanthropy. His efforts have been instrumental in advocating policies in California for children. Welcome, Stu. It's great to see you.
Thank you, Herb.
Stu, we always start with, why did you become a pediatrician?
It's a great story. Having a Jewish mother, she wants her sons to be a doctor, a lawyer. But when I was 15, I suddenly got very ill. I had fever, and I was pale and tired. It turned out to be very anemic and had blood in the stools. And I was sent to see the family GP, who my family adored. But he was basically a country bumpkin. And he hospitalized me at a community hospital in Winnipeg, Canada, where I was there for a couple of days, and nothing was done. They didn't really know what was going on. And finally, someone's wisdom, they said, let's transfer you to the Winnipeg Children's Hospital. So I get transferred there, and within a day, they make the diagnosis of ulcerative colitis and give me treatment, and I'm on my way to recovery. But being in the hospital and seeing these individuals with white coats coming in the room every day and talking about everything and talking to you. And there was a doctor with a bigger white coat who was in charge of that. And then there was a doctor in a suit who was in charge, he or she was in charge of them and talking about everything, differential diagnosis. It sounded so exciting to me. And I knew from that point on, I wanted to be a doctor, probably a pediatrician.
Very nice story. And we could just talk about how the management of ulcerative colitis has changed since you were a kid to today. That would be a phenomenal story for another day. Why San Diego? How does a Canadian end up in San Diego?
Residencies in Canada are 4 years. The 4th year is primarily research-oriented and studying for the boards. And I applied for a fellowship, and I was awarded a pediatric fellowship, a 1-year fellowship. And I decided, based on the fact during my residency, I got to travel several dozen times, part of the Indian health program and Eskimo health program, to native Indian reservations in northern Manitoba and in the Northwest Territories as part of health clinics. And that really got my interest going in their impoverished living and the master's in public health. And I had a choice of going to North Carolina or San Diego. In San Diego, where Helen Wallace was, she wrote the textbook on maternal child health. And being in Winnipeg, where it's winter 8 months of the year, I decided to go to San Diego. I also remember in 1973 reading the backstory in Sports Illustrated. It stuck in me all those years. There was a story about San Diego. Everybody there was jogging because the weather was good. They were all outside all year. They had the healthiest population in the country. And so that stuck in my mind, and I decided to choose San Diego basically for the weather.
And then you won the lottery.
So I had to go back to Canada, back to the university to teach. I was boarded in Canada, boarded in the United States, and I was ready to practice. But in those days, even though the LCME covers the Canadian medical schools as well as US, the process was very difficult. So I was applying for a green card, And Ted Kennedy had this marvelous idea of having 5,000 Canadians, 5,000 in Britain become U.S. citizens through a lottery. It was the very first lottery, and it was unregulated. There was 1 week in February where you could send letters in. And the first time around, they weren't prepared. They didn't limit the number of letters. My father was in the schmata business, in the garment industry. I went to his office and I stamped up 850 letters. And not surprisingly, I got picked for the visa lottery. And so instead of waiting for a multi-year process to get my green card, 6 weeks later, I was granted a green card thanks to Ted Kennedy.
Oh my God. And your father.
It sounds like he gamed the system a little bit. I love it.
After that, you're only allowed in the future things to do one application, but it was very unregulated the first time.
And how did you meet Adam Breslow?
So Adam is one of the founders. I met him, actually, I was working in independent practice in the hospital, and he was just a newly minted physician because I actually met him as a resident. The founding father of our group, though, was Dr. Kornreich, Glenn Kornreich, and he's still around and my biggest mentor. He had this vision early on looking at both the fact that the Sherman Antitrust Act allowed insurers to collude, but doctors couldn't collude on pricing, that there was a big discrepancy. And he had the vision that you had to go to big scale to be successful in the future, that these mom and pop solo practices weren't going to make it much longer. And so very early on, basically in the early 90s, with the help of the hospital and legal help, he was able to have a vision to form the group. So the first group of founders was in 1995, 29 doctors. And shortly after, 9 months later, I was the second group, the B shareholders of founders, another group, and we were 45 of us. And I was immediately on the board of directors for Children's Primary Care Medical Group. And let me tell you, the most fun I've ever had in practice was the building of the group. The first 20 years, the board meetings were, there was fighting, there was verbal jousting, everybody had their own shtick, but we all got along eventually, and it became very successful financially due to Dr. Kornreich, Dr. Page, Dr. Breslow. But now the group has grown to 180 providers and 34 sites, and I'm not on the board, but I can say that the board deals with risk management and protection of what we have and trying to stay financially viable. It's much more fun building the empire than maintaining it and sustaining it.
Yeah, the soldiers you have to deal with, doctors, and really tricky people.
What was eye-opening to me over the years was the discrepancy between what a large group can negotiate with the insurers versus a small group. You'd think it's just a few percentage points, but when we took over some groups, we could see there's 50% difference in some of the contracts on these evergreen contracts that these small solo docs had. The scale really is important. And that's one of the biggest eye-opening things that I noticed over the years was it's incredible. Like you can't survive really as a solo independent practice, not be part of an IPA or clinical wall, a group without walls or whatever. But the consolidation was really based on collective negotiation with the insurance companies.
Now, why do you think that there's this discrepancy between solo and bigger groups?
It's just the leverage they have to negotiate. That's all.
So sure if it's leverage or it's because they can bully a solo practitioner because they're afraid of the solo practitioner is afraid of the insurance company, where as a bigger group, they can't bully so hard.
Correct.
And your group is phenomenal, right? You're all the way from the border with Mexico up to Orange County now, and you're the biggest safety net provider for the state of California.
Yeah.
And
yes.
Last I checked, I think you guys have 300,000 covered lives.
350,000
or attributable lives that you manage.
Yeah. But interestingly enough, San Diego is a naval base. We have over 23,000 TRICARE patients, which from my estimation is probably 1% of the TRICARE West. So we have a lot of TRICARE military families too.
Wow. And the business of medicine or the business of pediatrics has really changed over our careers.
So I gave a talk at the NCE 2 years ago about 4 decades in practice. I'm not sure how well it was received, but it was during the COVID period. I couldn't see if my talk was enjoyed or not, but I was really talking about when I got to San Diego and started practice in 87. I came back after being in public health in 85 and 86. It was like the Wild West. You had numerous small practices. Every doctor had their own shtick, and there was very little regulation of practice as we see it today. And I was having lunch every day in the community hospital, and I would see these adult doctors doing all sorts of procedures that I never saw done with such frequency back in Canada, including stenting, back operations. There was a lot of surgeons at the hospital doing all sorts of things, billing Medicare. It didn't seem like the frequency of it was the same in Canada. And over the years, with consolidation, I think in regulation, the good part of it is there's no more Wild West. The quality of medicine is certainly appreciated. So first, we noticed that the small and solo practices were forced to take managed care and HMO patients. So they developed IPAs. And initially, I was on the board of 3 of them, and they were around every corner you were forming an IPA. That over a decade and a half, they consolidated into a few well-run IPAs. And then our group was lucky enough to form our own IPA with pediatric-only patients, which was really unique. And then we noticed further consolidation of the small and solo practices. Big people were selling their practice and joining large groups. So we have very few affiliate individual pediatricians in San Diego. And those that are small and solo have joined our IPA that Children's Primary Care runs. So it's part of a larger group, and they're subject to regulation. And given the EMR with meaningful use that came in the 2010s, we certainly are able to track quality in a much more granular way. And I think that so the practice has improved. That's the good part of consolidation. The bad part is it's now leading to private equity and vested interest running practices, consolidating them. And it's all about returning money to the shareholder in some of these groups, and it's not in the best interest of the patients. And the other part of the consolidation is I miss the sense of community that we had growing up. I was past president of the Medical Society, involved with the state, local, state, national, but I also interacted with specialists from all different walks of life in the IPAs. And if I needed an ophthalmologist, I could call one. I needed a cardiac person for the family, cardiologist. We knew everybody. So first it evolved into just knowing pediatricians and not knowing the specialists because you weren't going to the hospital and you weren't going to IPA meetings. And then it devolved into these silos where pediatricians just know the pediatricians in their own group. They don't know pediatricians in Kaiser, Scritch, Sharpie, Steele. So the fact that we're siloed now, I think we all agree that the people in my vintage, we lack the richness and the diversity of the pluralism of the medical community. We're just pediatricians in our own group. But having said that, the young pediatricians, that's how they've grown up. And so they don't miss that richness and diversity of the medical community. But I certainly enjoy that. I call that the golden era of the sort of medical community.
Yeah, the lack of community is hurting us mentally. And you don't learn new things because you're not around new ideas. We're all just in the same old ideas, and no innovation can happen like that. What challenges do you see ahead for the specialty of pediatrics?
So I don't see it being sustainable, obviously, right now, given the high cost of medical education and the limited salaries based on the fact that Medicaid is our main payer, and we need the same resources as other specialists, but we don't get the same payment. And whether it's going to be value-based care or some other amalgam of payment, it's not going to be enough to sustain people. So I see our whole system moving to some sort of universal access to care. It's not going to be a single payer, but maybe we'll be the German model where we'll have universal access. It'll be employer-based plus government-based, but the rates will be set for primary care. It may not be fully taxable. A very bare bones plan will be taxable. And then if you want anything more like a Cadillac or Mercedes or Land Rover, whatever, then you can get private insurance. And then the groups will compete on that level, and the insurance companies will compete on the level for the extra benefits of the plan. And I think that the physicians will be on salary. And I think that the salaries will be limited to a very smaller band. They're not going to be 6 to 10 times difference from the anesthesiologist to the pediatrician. They'll be 2 times different. And maybe that'll make practice more sustainable for the pediatricians that are in practice. But I think the system's going to change very rapidly in the next decade.
Do you think direct primary care and direct to employer primary care will play a role in that system?
I'm sorry, I didn't.
Do you think that direct primary care and direct to employer care?
All basis. If you think about the average family plan being $25,000 in premiums, and if you just had a bare bones catastrophic plan and paid cash for your services, yes. But again, pediatricians are limited because of their base. If you look in general, what I learned through the AMA involvement was, in 1965, they developed Medicare as the entitlement program and Medicaid as the means tested program. And what happens if it was the other way around? But it's not. So in 1965, 40+% of seniors were in poverty. Now with Social Security and Medicare, it's 6%. We have the wealthiest group of seniors in the whole world. In 1965, over 40% of kids were living in below or just slightly above one standard deviation of the federal poverty level. And that hasn't changed since 1965 with Medicaid. So what if it was reversed? The Medicaid was the entitlement program. So we can argue or disagree that maybe the expansion of Medicaid to able-bodied adults hasn't been good for the program and is taking money from where it needs to go to pregnant women, children, and people in nursing homes. But clearly something happened. It wasn't the intention. The intention was to get kids out of poverty. We haven't done that. And so a lot of what, in terms of advocacy at the, whether it's AT or AMA or CMA, is to advocate for access to care, but try to make the system work more for children in poverty.
I think that the problem is that no child should be on Medicaid, because our goal should be to move our young families out of poverty, not trap them into poverty. And I've always said that the problem with healthcare in the U.S. is that we are lied to by all sides every day. We need a basic public health program that benefits the young, and let's stop with the able-bodied people on Medicaid and the shenanigans that the liberal states play with the provider taxes so they can get more money out of Washington. Let's use those taxes to fund VFC, vaccines for children, universal. Child exams at a set rate that is enough to provide the care in every community across the United States, whether you're a poor town in rural Mississippi or a poor immigrant community in North California or a not so great neighborhood in Northern Virginia. Your children will get access to preventive care at the same rate. And we will tax the health plans, and we will tax the hospitals, many of them who are not for profit, to provide that. They're already used to paying for that tax. Now it's being used to benefit people that could go on the exchange with subsidies, get a job, and contribute. So as long as the children are put into the safety net, the payer of last resort, where the name of the game is to restrict payment, to restrict access, to save dollars, because we can't afford to provide Cadillac care to the poor, infirmed, age, dual enrolling Medicare that's end of life in a nursing home. We will not have good outcomes in pediatrics, and we will not have a strong, thriving, young, entrepreneurial workforce entering and sustaining the democracy. But
what I don't understand, Stu, what I don't understand is with these Medicaid lines of business, they're called, it used to have the gold card Medicaid card. They didn't pay very well, whatever. It was an office visit. Now they push them into these managed care Medicaid plans that pay 80% of Medicare. It's not great, but it's definitely better than the straight Medicaid rates. And they depending on which plan, sometimes they follow the Medicaid rates, sometimes they follow the Medicare rates. They're allowed to pick and choose which one not to pay with, depending on their contracts. But they do pay better than straight Medicaid. So the money is there. They're getting the money. They're filtering it through an organization, and they're paying the doctor at a lesser rate. They put their names on baseball stadiums. There's commercials. There's concert halls with the names of the companies, the bureaucrats that work there. There's so much waste in administration at the insurance level to make it managed care Medicaid. Why don't they just pay properly and be done with it?
So I agree with what both of you have said. What we're saying is the incentives are not aligned properly, that the tax exempt institutions are getting away with a lot of chicanery, and that the system needs to work better. But again, there's a lot of political obstacles to making it worse. We need to see even worse outcomes, and then before things get better, we need to see the getting worse.
Well, unfortunately, everybody wants to eat their chocolate cake, drink their bottle of wine, and get their GLP-1 and not go on the treadmill. And it's everybody, myself included. Everybody wants all of that. And that's not possible. If you want to live a healthy life, you can't drink a bottle of wine before you go in to see the kids. And you can't eat chocolate cake every night. And you got to walk at least if you're not going to do some other sort of exercise, if you want to have a healthy, long life. And then a little bit of luck. Some people get leukemia at 2 years of age. That's just unlucky. But that's a problem. We live in a democracy, and we have to convince enough people that's a good idea. We can't just shove it down people's throats. That's hard. So why are you so involved in the AAP chapter in California, which is humongous?
I've been involved more at the district level from my chapter involvement. I think, again, coming from...
So I'm going to interrupt you a second, because maybe some of our viewers don't know. What is the difference between the district, the state chapters, and the national organization?
So there's 10 different districts, and most of the districts are combined of several states, up to even 7 or 8, including some provinces in Canada. District 9 has been unique in that, and District 2 is just New York, and District 9 is just California. And we have 4 different chapters. San Diego's chapter 3. I've been on the board of the district AP California. I just stepped off after 30 years of involvement. And to me, the core of being involved from day one was, again, advocacy, initially for the pediatrician. I was worried about the sustainability of practice, and I knew that they needed really strong voices advocating for the profession, for appropriate payment and resources for what we do. But slowly and then rapidly over the first couple of years, being exposed to some of the giants of pediatrics, I would say like Bron Anders. She was the one who started the CATCH program at the AAP, and she also had a TB clinic and was involved with Indian healthcare. Working with her and right along with her and seeing some of these things, I also became convinced, that the AAP had a role for advocacy for children, for access to care, getting the resources they need. But my core thing for me was promoting the profession. And I saw the power of working with legislative bodies and working with the public and working with our good name, getting things done. I was fortunate enough during my time as district chair to have my good friend Richard Pad, whom I served together as a co-delegate for the AAP at the AMA for 25 years. He became an assemblyman and a later senator in the state of California, and he ran the health committee. And with that, and with Chris Calvin, who was at the time the CEO of the AAP California and had deep roots in the legislative assembly with people working for the governor, during my time, we were able to pass 3 things that I thought were really important. One was coverage of Medi-Cal for undocumented kids. And 2 was the SB 277, which was the eliminated, any personal belief exemptions for vaccines. And 3 was the origin of Prop 56, where we were able to get cigarette tax money, which later now has been supplemented by Prop 35, and other monies were able to move the payment of Medi-Cal for primary care to Medicare RBRBS 100% or greater. And so the pediatricians at least in California were able to get the resources they need. 95% of the Medi-Cal pediatrics in California is not fee-for-service. So the fee-for-service horrible scheduling is not what we get paid. 95% is getting paid under managed care. And that's really helped. So that was what I was able to accomplish as district chair, but it's really with working with many other people in the California Medical Association and in the state legislature. And I worked bipartisanly with people on both sides of the legislature, and it's been really tremendous getting stuff done. Just as an anecdote, Herb, I started with the Medical Society making friends with some of our legislators. And we had one in particular who was a young Republican legislator named Nathan Fletcher. He's since left politics for different reasons, but at the time he became a state assemblyman and he managed to get on the health committee, which was a majority of Democrats. And going back years before we passed SB 277, we were trying to pass a bill to mandate DTaP for seventh graders. And year after year, it didn't get passed. And someone called me from a children's health fund and said, I hear you're friends with that legislator, and he's on the health committee. Give him a call and see if he'll sign on to the bill. I called him, and I didn't even get to my doctor's chief of staff, and said, you'd like to sign on to the bill. And a week later, I get a call back from this person from the Children's Defense Fund, and he's in tears. He said, I don't know what happened, what you did, but not only did your friend sign on, but a couple of other Republican people signed on to the bill, and it's going to pass, and we're going to have TDAP mandated for seventh graders. And I thought, wow, just one phone call. And to me, that was like, if I could do that, maybe we can get other things done with these legislators. So that was a tremendous opportunity.
So walk me back a little bit. That there's 4 chapters of the AP in California. And so each chapter...
We work together for advocacy as the district. So the district is strictly there for together working for advocacy for kids.
But I'm trying to understand structure. So is each of the 4 chapters an independent not-for-profit?
Yes, either
okay.
C6 or 501c3.
And then the district, is that owned by the AP in Chicago, or is that another not-for?
District is independently thing. Right now, though, we have 3 chapters. The LA chapter, for reasons, decided to leave, but now they're looking to come back in. But the chapters are independently operated, and then it's a separate 501c6, I believe, for the AP California, just to do advocacy together in Sacramento. And our main fundraising for that we have a lobbyist, we have executive director, and we have the yearly CME in Las Vegas. It's the largest CME event outside of national, and it's usually around Thanksgiving time in Las Vegas. And I've been lucky enough to be associated with that for almost 30 years.
And that P districts, are they owned by the P in Chicago or no? So they're another not-for-profit.
Yes.
Okay. All right. And then are the district chairs sometimes elected to the board of directors at the AP, but not always?
No, the district chair is typically voted on by all the members of AP in California and has a co-role as both chairing the AP California and also being on the board of national. So it's separate roles.
Okay. Oh, but that is how you get to the board. One way you get to the board is by being a district chair.
Yeah.
Like our friend Leah Gagina is a district chair for Chapter 5, which I think is Ohio, Michigan, and maybe Indiana. And so she's on the board because she's a district chair for those 3.
The district chairs are members, the presidents of on the AP board members are the district chairs. Plus now they have several at-large members picked from specialists in primary care and surgical subspecialties.
And now you can
find time for these things.
If I was fortunate enough to be part of a large group with Dr. Cornrich, Dr. Page, and Dr. Breslow doing all the hard work. Although I was on the board, I had minimal responsibilities. And so I was able to devote a lot of extra time to the AMA and CMA. It was just a passion. Yeah.
And then you served at the AP. in committees like the developmental committee, and now you're in the philanthropy committee?
Yes. Way back when I was on the task force on reimbursement, which seems like 100 years ago. And at the AMA, I served on a committee, try to change the CPT coding, the original one that we tried to change 95, 97 codes, which my committee served as the precursor to the changes that were made a few years ago to the coding and reimbursement. But at AMA, I was like the point person for practice issues and vaccine issues at the AMA.
Well, and at the AP and the philanthropy committee now, are you the chair of that committee or just a
No,
member?
the Dr. Goes is the chair.
So you're
Just a hanger honor.
A hanger honor. Now, with all these things that you do, how do you find time to have a family, a wife, and hobbies?
So that's really, I think it's my ADD. 3 of my 4 kids got treated for ADD. I had to make it work without treatment, but I think that was it. And having a very patient and loving and understanding wife who can do that. But yeah, it's been, I think, trying to accomplish a lot and having a few hobbies. I don't have a lot of hobbies. Occasionally I have our dogs, which I walk every day, the 3 dogs, going to the beach, fishing, deep sea fishing, a couple trips a year. And then the horse racing became a hobby through involvement with another pediatrician.
Yeah. So do you own a horse? I can't think that you ride the horse at the race.
Yes, Terry Bellman is a good friend, pediatrician in Huntington Beach, who long ago got interested in horse racing, convinced us. We worked together for many years at summer camps, and he convinced me to go in. And of course, Dana and I got a share of a horse, and we went to the first race, and of course, our horse won. It's like winning the Super Bowl. It's like hooked us. We've had part of a syndicate, a number of horses. They're not stakes grade horses. They're basic horses, but we've had one that had to be put down after a training accident. We've had a number that have become lame and to pasture. So we look at it as loaning money to a relative and you're never going to get it back. So except the fun of the experience and meeting the different people we have and learning about the industry has been a lot of fun with us. But right now we're down to 1 horse and he's healing and not racing right now. And given the tuition expenses for son number 4, we decided to go to one of the most expensive universities on the West Coast called Loyola Marymount. We're limited right now and get him through school.
And your wife is a phenomenal leader outside of the family too.
Yeah, she is the manager of a postpartum unit at the 2nd largest women's hospital in California, in charge of 180 nurses of postpartum and lactation. But we met in the hospital years ago when she was just a postpartum nurse. And we were both divorced. My kids were 6 and 8. I'd been single for 5 or 6 years. She had a 3-year-old at the time, and she was smiling at me. So I went to look, but I didn't know she was smiling at me, but making fun of me because I was wearing Birkenstocks and shorts in the nursery on a weekend day. And we talked and we made some small talk, and I gave her my email, invite her out for lunch, and we were married 5 months later. That's
wow.
24 years ago. She's an incredible person, supporter, understands things, and been a really good supporter for letting me do all these activities.
Wow. George has got his own version of that. His wife, Delia. It's the brains and the engine behind the Rogo magic.
Totally.
We were getting ready to come to this conference, and she packed everything, got the tickets. I just had to get the car service to take us to the airport, the taxi.
That's it.
Delia is phenomenal.
Yeah.
And then
in my years of involvement with organized medicine, again, the best part was making friends across the country. The richness and diversity, meeting people from different areas geographically, different backgrounds, and looking forward to going to different meetings makes it a lot of fun.
I remember when I first started out, they used to have all these society meetings and local meetings. I used to get it when the senior physicians has come with me to meet people at these meetings. I used to get excited to go out to meet that pediatrician, that specialist. It used to be a lot of fun. Nowadays, you can't get anybody to go to these meetings. Nobody wants to go. Everybody's too busy.
No, and I'll share another story. Been privileged to be a speaker with Pharma on vaccines for a number of years. But given the antipathy to Pharma right now, it's the same core group of physicians that are now in their 60s that meet to do some of the speaker training and on vaccines. The young doctors don't even let the Pharma into their offices. And I think they're missing something because some of the information that we get is really critical. I know there were excesses in the past, but I still think Pharma plays a critical role. Going back, basically, I got involved I was on the editorial board of Pediatric News, the sort of throwaway journal that you get. And I had a guest column once or twice a year. And I think it was 97. I wrote this prescient column that was saying like, hey, our margin on vaccines is going down. We used to get charged $4 for Tdap and get paid $6 and have a huge profit. Now we're giving vaccines that cost $120 and we're getting paid $122. That's not sustainable. So I wrote a long article on the falling off the cliff on vaccine reimbursement, and somehow it went viral. And all of a sudden I was asked to speak different places. I spoke 2 years. I spoke at the plenary session of the AAP, and then I gave another talk the next year there. And all of a sudden the pharma companies came calling and said, we want you to be part of our speaker program just to talk about it. And then they found out that I was an expert in coding as well for vaccines and reimbursement. And so I was invited by several different pharma companies to be part of the development of speaker training modules for vaccines, and then became a speaker. And that's been a really interesting experience too.
Are you a speaker for before this?
So I was an investigator for palivizumab way back when. I did some studies on singular and asthma, and I did some studies on some of the newer antibiotics for otitis. But again, after we got going with the group, based on my activities in organized medicine and with our group, I wasn't able to carry on the research, but I was part of the impact study with palivizumab, and I remained active in an advisory role with people working on monoclonal antibody for RSV. It was MedImmune, and then it became AstraZeneca over time. And yes, I've been involved with the development of that product, just on an advisory basis with Sanofi.
And I think that, to your point, I think you're absolutely right. And Paul often makes this point. He's made it on the show several times. He says, first of all, nobody but Merck would fund 26 years of failure until we finally had the rotavirus vaccine. No one has the patience. It's just only big, deep pockets can do that. And he said, second of all, I could be all the smart that you, and I'm paraphrasing, you can be all the smart that I can be and want to be. If Merck doesn't have a production line to put that vaccine in pediatricians' offices, no child would receive a vaccine. And lastly, he says, if the general pediatrician doesn't pull it out of the refrigerator and talk to the parent, it would sit in the shelf and it would rot. So yes, vaccines have been a tremendous improvement in the lives of society, but it has been a team sport. It's been the pharma industry, the pediatricians, the government that paid for those who can't afford it, and the parents that take the risk of having their kids take a medication in the hope that they never get ill with this or that vaccine. And the younger doctors and the health systems, I think, are shooting themselves in the foot by not being open-minded about coming to these speaker-driven dinners where everything is very tightly controlled so that you're giving a fair and balanced presentation. But the amount, at least for me, the amount of time and money that Sanofi spent teaching me how to teach or share information with pediatricians is ungodly. Everything from how to tell the story to how the product works and how do you get to a cure.
And I've been fortunate enough to see both sides of it, the eagle eye version from how the board of the academy makes recommendations, for example, for the use of palivizumab. Because of my conflict of interest, I was just an observer on that on the board. But I can say that seeing it from that side and then seeing it from the pharma side, there's a great deal of information and there's a great many challenges. it's a $2 billion investment to get a monoclonal antibody or vaccine from the ground through, and many of them are going to be failures. And so I think pharma gets a bad rap on the fact that it's so expensive to develop some of these things. But to see the benefits now of having a universal monoclonal antibody to RSV, our rates went way down this year for hospitalizations, went way down. But to see it from development all the way through, and particularly with the Ortis, the monoclonal antibody, the company had to work hard to get it through the VFC program. There were some other changes, but now that it's there, and never mind the training that we get as speakers, how to share information, when we meet individually with our medical science liaison, which I do a couple times a year, the information that I get on pipeline drugs, the information I get on what's going on with different vaccines like flu blog and the recombinant vaccine versus the regular flu, the inside information, the articles that I get make me much more informed. And I think that's the point that some of the younger physicians are missing. It's not that you're going to get inculcated by the pharma, but you're going to get a lot of information from them that you may not otherwise get.
I think there's a difference between the pharmaceutical representative that comes by in the old days, used to drop some sticky notes and pens, and they have a canned speech that's close to worthless, versus the medical science liaisons. And they're mostly pharmacists, and these people are subject matter experts. If you're an MSL for Beyfortis, they have given you so much education and you have read so many articles that if I have a question as to why, how, they've read it, and if they don't know the answer, they can go up the chain to the medical director, who then calls me up and says, "Hey, Herb, I heard you had a question. This is why we're thinking. Let me share some articles with you. Call me back after you read them if you want to discuss them." And no one else does that for us, because the hospitals don't do it. The insurance companies don't do it. Society doesn't do it. It's an incredible resource that you should not be afraid to tap.
I agree, but unfortunately, their relationships are limited to our cohort of physicians. They're not reading the newer ones or so. They might get to a meeting of an IPA and head to the head of pharmacy or head of therapeutics to talk about it, but the people that are in the trenches practicing medicine, they're not forging new relationships at the moment.
They're not. That's unfortunate. That's very unfortunate. What else have I not asked you that you think is important to share with our audience?
That's a really good question. I think how pediatrics has changed, and I think we've talked about the healthcare financing part of it, but we really haven't talked about the parenting part of it. I think that there's a lack of resiliency with children today, and there's a huge amount of anxiety generated by current parenting styles. And you see it and then the social media contributes as well. But so many of our teens have obesity from the processed foods, and they have type 2 diabetes trends from that. And they also have anxiety. And it's not simply social media. We see changes in parenting that started. When we started, we never saw 15, 16, 17-year-olds come in with one day of sore throat without a fever because it might be something bad. We didn't see a 10-year-old that came home from school with a headache come into the extended care clinic at night. And parents think they have to come immediately to the doctor. It's become more like a first aid station. Now, for me, I like to work a lot of night clinics because it's great, and I enjoy working by myself with a great nurse and a great team at nighttime. But I'm seeing more and more stuff that probably doesn't need to be there. We used to teach the parents how to stay out of the office, but the incentives aren't aligned. The incentives are come to the office, you're going to get paid for service or whatever. And so there's no teaching of the parents. But even if we tried, I think that societal expectations of kids now are treating them much more like they're in a bubble and plastic wrap. And so one of the points of summer camp that I enjoyed was it builds kids' self-esteem. It gives them a little resiliency, how to work out problems and how to problem solve and how to be on their own. I think that was a great opportunity. But I think there are other opportunities for training parents on how to give their kids a little more adventurous, a little more opportunity, whether it's in nature or whether it's outside or whether it's challenging stuff, and not to treat them like they're so fragile. But you see the same thing?
I think a lot of the stuff with the immediate gratification, access to care was developed because of the urgent care centers. You call your doctor, I assume that they're going to be closed and not going to get you an appointment, so I'll go to the urgent care. They have to go to be seen. But truth be told, a lot of the parents of today, Dr. Google, they use Dr. Google and they get scared because that differential is very long. Before they used to ask the grandmother. Now they don't ask the grandmother because they don't believe them, so they'll search, and then in the differential of a fever could be leukemia, and they freak out over that word. And so they'll have to come in, and your education happens when they come in and you tell them, don't worry, it's not leukemia, it's just a little virus. And you'll be fine in 2 days. And if you don't get better, you come back. Before they used to stay 4, 5, 6 days, you'd come in, you make your diagnosis. Now it requires maybe 2 or 3 visits for them to get that same diagnosis because the process of the illness has to process. Interesting story. There's this young mother that lives up the street with 3 kids. They used to live in Manhattan. Now they live in Dix Hills in Long Island. I guess very needy, she needs everything quickly. So she goes to Manhattan for her pediatric care. So she called them. They didn't call back. She would go to her dermatologist for this rash. They didn't call back. What did she do? She knew I was a pediatrician because she see me walking around with the dog. She came and she knocked. I don't even know her name. She knocked on my door because the kid had a molluscum that was treated by the dermatologist with some irritation, some freezing, and it was red. So she was freaking out that it's a cellulitis. Now, fortunately, I wasn't home. My son was home, who's a fourth-year medical student, and he recognized it, and he put her at ease. Was that appropriate? That was not appropriate. Was it neighborly?
Oh, I argue with you. It is. I think I argue with you. It is. It is. I think that everything Stu has said, and I feel old, is that the problems that we have in this great democracy, and for Stu and I, this is our adopted country, is that the political forces have destroyed everything that was good about our communities. So I grew up, when I came to the U.S. in 1977, my dad bought a house in a neighborhood northwest of Washington, D.C., which half is Jews and the other half is Catholic at that point. And I, since 1977, have seen my Jewish brothers and sisters walk, grandfather, parents, and children, to the synagogue on Saturdays. Cold weather, hot weather, muggy, 85-degree, and they still dress the same. The girls wear dresses, the guys wear slacks and a button down. Okay. And they put the kippah on. And it's the most beautiful thing to see every Saturday. I was raised Catholic. We drove the car to church, went to church, then went out to Ponderosa with my dad, my mom, and my sister for supper after church. When the family across my dad's house, who are just incredible human beings, the son, who's a little older than me, bought the house from his dad. So Betty was the grandmother. Miss Betty was a grandmother. Now, Mike and Ann have grandchildren. And when one day one of the grandchildren got sick, I'm not licensed in Maryland, and I was at my dad's house drinking wine with him. Mike knocked on the door and he said, "Herb." I'm like, "Yes, Mike." "My daughter and my wife are freaking out about the grandson." I'm like, "Mike, I've had 2 glasses of wine." He says, "That doesn't matter. Can you come over?" And I walked over, across the street, on the porch, looked at the kid. I don't remember if it was a rash or what it was. I said, "There's nothing wrong. You guys are okay. You don't need to worry about it." And that sense of community decreases the anxiety. They could care less that I had 2 glasses of wine. They're like, we just need somebody with experience to eyeball the kid and know whether we worry or not. No, don't worry. They weren't asking for my license, my board certification, giving me a drug test, nothing. And is it anything to me to spend 15 minutes with somebody that I've shared a neighborhood for 77 years, for instance, since 1970. No, I felt,
but a lot of
I felt honored.
Honored, yes.
I felt honored that they trusted me because they don't know what kind of pediatrician I am. They know me since I'm a kid.
Yeah. You know what's interesting?
And that community, George, that community,
You're
if we don't
correct.
build community, and
You're
for
correct.
for us as physicians, for us as people living, it creates a very toxic environment where you're sitting alone, producing the podcast with a bottle of bourbon in the big house, in the nice neighborhood, and you don't socialize.
Yeah.
And anxiety takes a hold.
But
And
let me
that
tell
is
you
not
this
healthy.
story, Herb. Stop talking. Listen. So what happened? I said this story to some of the younger physicians in our office, and they were appalled at how could we have done that. It's so inappropriate. You should not answer. You should not tell. You should tell them to go see their doctor. Throw them away. Fast forward 2 weeks later, I was walking around with my wife and the dog, and we bumped into that lady. She lives 3 streets. I don't even know her first name. And I was with my son, and she said to me, "Did you hear what happened?" I said, "Yeah, I heard about it. I'm glad the child's okay. I'm glad my son was able to help you." And she says, "I will like to move my children to your office now." So 3 kids came to our office. She's no longer going to go to Manhattan for her care. Now, do we really want this lady? Yeah, I guess she's a patient. So it was a nice ending at the end.
Yeah. I'm going to tell you a very funny story because, there's two mentioned. Some of the quality improvement, quality projects have made medicine better in the U.S. But one of my nurses had abdominal pain, and she went to her family doctor. And they put her in the hospital. They thought she had appendicitis. And I went to visit her because that's what my dad taught me. When somebody works for you, they're in the hospital, you take the time to go see them. So I examined her belly, and I said, I'm not saying what her name is in the air, "Julie, you don't have an acute abdomen. Did they get a CT scan?" No. The surgeon, the family practitioner called the surgeon, and they got me scheduled for later on the operating room. I'm like, I've done a lot of ER work. We don't take people to the OR without an CT scan anymore. That's old school. That I did in medical school, but that changed. And now with the kids at a good institution is an ultrasound. I don't know who the surgeon is. He's a general surgeon. I don't know him. I don't have privileges at this hospital, Fair Oaks Hospital. I do have pediatric privileges at Fair Oaks, but I don't have adult privileges. So I'm actually breaking the bylaws by examining an adult patient on an adult ward. But let me see a minute. So I went out, talked to the nurse, and I said, "Do you know the surgeon?" And she looked down and she wouldn't answer. I'm like, "Do you know if Dr. Pasako is around? He's the adult pulmonary doctor." He said, "Yeah, he's probably rounding. I saw him a little earlier." I said, "Page him." So they page him. He gets on the phone. Dr. Pazako's older than me, Greek, has a winery, wonderful man. He's always crabby. "What the hell are you calling me for? I don't see kids." So I told him the story, and I told him the surgeon. He goes, "Oh my God. Oh my God. Get her another surgeon. That guy is nothing but trouble." That's what community is. I didn't get paid for that. I didn't get a patient out of that. But I'll go to my grave knowing that I helped a friend and I prevented a disaster.
Yep.
And that may not make me a dime richer, but I hope someone remembers and tells that story when they put me in the box and bury me.
Who's Dr. Herb?
Great
Do you know
story.
what Dr. Herb is? Let's close
Great
this.
story, Herb, but I want to segue just to say that I've really enjoyed my career and, again, the friends and the people that I've made, and I've had wonderful opportunities. And I do have faith in the next generation of pediatricians that somehow they're going to be resilient enough to carry on and sustain the profession given the changes. But I think it's always important for us to mentor people under us so that they come do the same advocacy. They continue to ask questions and truth to power, and they continue to be very asking questions about different changes that are made. We want to protect our profession, but we can't just run like lemmings over the seawall. We need to make sure that the next generation is not just going to advocate for kids, but advocate for pediatricians as well.
You're absolutely right. We need to advocate for mothers, teachers, and pediatricians, because if we don't do the work, the children are not raised properly and they don't become functional adults.
All right.
Thank you. This has been a wonderful opportunity to get to talk to friends.
All right. So you go back to seeing kids. I'm going to go back to seeing friends at this conference. And
they're awesome. Continue to shine a light on pediatricians across the country.
Yeah, I'm bumping into people say, I saw that podcast, like celebrity status almost. Thanks.
It's great to see you. Say hi to Adam for me.
I will.
All right. Bye-bye. Bye.
Thank you for listening. This has been a production of the Pediatric Lounge. On the show notes, you will find links to our co-host and other important notes, as well as a timetable of the topics discussed today. Don't forget to follow us on social media and subscribe to wherever you listen to your podcast. Leave us a great review, as it helps us greatly. In the meantime, we will see you next week. The Pediatric Lounge. The conversations are not intended as medical advice, and the opinions expressed are solely those of the host and the guest.